Hey guys, Brandon Garrett here, founder and president of OnboardIT. Today we are releasing our new podcast series, and we are starting this podcast series because we noticed that across the board with both prospects and customers, we're getting these types of questions and lack of understanding. So we're really going to be starting this podcast series to go over common questions and misunderstandings, and we're going to be talking about a variety of different topics. Today, we're going to be going over Windows and the different types of profiles that exist on Windows, kind of go into detail about what those all look like and why you should use different types of profiles. So with that, let's get into it. Stefan, Julio, thanks for joining this podcast. Today we're going to have a conversation of something that's important and has come up a lot in discussions with customers and prospects about Windows profile types, right? So what are the types of profiles? Why do we want to use certain types of profiles? What is a joined device? All these different things, right? So Stefan, maybe you could kind of give the viewer a little intro to the different types of profiles that exist out there.
Yeah, of course. A profile. First, what is a profile? We're talking specifically about Windows in this case. A profile is when you sign into a computer and you have all your files and settings, and for example, your Chrome bookmarks or your Edge bookmarks, and your desktop files and the files in your documents folder. And there are many different ways to configure a profile. There's no bad option. Of course, there are only good options, but the best option depends on how you run your company, or maybe it's your personal computer for yourself, and you have a different type of profile. And we're going to discuss today what might be the best option for your company and why.
Okay. And so there's 4 types of profiles, right? So maybe Julio, you could give us an overview of what are those different types of profiles that can exist on a Windows device?
Yeah, of course. Obviously, I think the one that the majority of people are gonna know is probably like a local or a personal profile, which is usually something that you set up like when you do like your first initial setup on the device, right? You go
Out
in,
of box.
yep, you set up your username and your password, and then that's would be like your local profile. Those will be like defaulted with like administrator privileges, which means that you can pretty much accept and make all of the changes on your computer. A different kind of profile would be maybe like a managed work profile or a school profile. And that profile kind of like turns over those privileges over to your organization. And then other profiles, I mean,
Well, let's go. So let's go back. What's the difference between a local profile and a personal profile?
gotcha.
Let's drill on that first. And
Sure.
and with the change to Windows 11, how is Microsoft moving away from local profiles?
Yeah, so as far as like personal profiles, those are more like they're going to be used with a Microsoft email, right? So like an Outlook or whatever it is that you designate that to be. And then a local profile is going to be like more of like that administrative profile that we were talking about, where you do have all those options. Isn't really tied to an email like that through Microsoft. So I think that's kind of like what differentiates it. I mean, anything else you think that differentiates it more?
Yeah, maybe because if you have a local profile or a personal profile connected to your Outlook account or any other Microsoft account, your files are still at the same place on your local computer. Except if you select a personal profile, some settings will sync to your Microsoft account. So if you get a new PC, or if your PC gets lost or stolen and you get a new one, it will still sync all your settings to your new computer, like your desktop and documents and your maybe even your Edge bookmarks or other settings.
Right.
And that's a big reason, right? That Windows 11 is really trying to move away from local profiles that are bound to no account, right? And some people are frustrated by that, but Microsoft is really trying to make that push to say you can't sign into a local profile as easily. The out-of-box experience sort of prohibits you from doing it. They want you to go right into signing into an account, right? And so that's where you kind of have that choice. Well, are you going to sign into this personal Microsoft account, like an Outlook or something like that, or are you going to sign into your work account? So maybe talk to us a little bit. We talked about local versus a personal Microsoft. So then you have the concept of the work accounts, right? And you have both an Entra ID profile or previously Azure AD, which is tied with Microsoft Office 365, and then you have Active Directory. Talk to us a little bit about those two profile types.
Yeah, a work or school account or Entra ID account is connected to your company or organization tenant. So, for example, if you have an email address, someone at company.com, then you sign into your computer using that specific email address. It's your personal work account. And that's how I get all the confusion. If you get your new computer, you see the option a personal account or a work or school account. I get it why some users select a personal account because I think it's my computer. It's my work provided computer, but it's my personal computer. So I'll select a personal account and then it's connected to your Hotmail account. We'll discuss later why that isn't always the best option. Or you select a work or school account and then your computer gets connected to your organization. Your organization can set a couple of security policies to your device. And if you sign in, your password's always synchronized with your email password. So you have one password to sign into either your computer or your email address.
And that's a really important differentiation is the identity management. So for a company, one of the biggest reasons that a device really needs to be joined to an Active Directory server or Office 365 in a cloud environment is so that the user profile is, and the identity for the profile is driven in a manageable sense, right? The password can be reset. We are able to get into it as technicians if somebody were to leave the company. It's significantly more streamlined and manageable to do it in that way.
Yeah, that's correct. If you have one password, then IT can reset your password. You don't have to reset your password in multiple accounts or multiple places. They just have to reset your password for the organization, and that password will work for your computer as well as your email, as other company accessible programs.
Yeah.
Security is also a big addition to that, having like the Entra account, right? Because then like you were saying, management wise, and then you're able to manage like the security on it too, instead of like a local profile where it's just managed by like that person on that device.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's a whole nother conversation too, is how that work profile allows us to set the policies on the device. And so, yeah, Microsoft Intune or group policies, how we do that. But that's a whole nother conversation that we can get into, and a benefit of using work accounts and why for pretty much all companies, work accounts make the most sense. So a lot of times, people will hear us talk about a device join, right? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to have your device joined to Entra ID or joined to Active Directory?
Yeah. So from my understanding, it's basically that you are able to essentially manage some of those settings on that device through like your tenant, right? And through those tenant policies that you set in place versus like going back to that local profile or personal profile, you don't have that much management over it from like an IT organizational standpoint.
Yep.
And so I think that's pretty much like the main differentiator and what makes it a big positive in that sense.
I might add, when the device is joined, it gives you the ability to switch between users a lot easier.
True.
So you have that switch user tab as you're signing in, and
Right.
you're able to just sign into a different account. That device is bound to the organization directory. And so you're able to switch user, enter your email, your password that are the same as all of your other resources, whether that's kind of on-premise or in the cloud. And you're just able to enter a profile.
Yeah.
Like you're able to build that profile on the spot, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's like a lot of things that we can get into this, right? Like just from like getting into a profile without having to have someone's password with a temporary access pass, so that we can go in there and we can take a look at what their issue is without a user having to be present. You can't really do that with other profiles, right?
No. It's more difficult.
Yeah.
And especially with a Microsoft personal account.
Right, yeah.
If they're signing in with that, it's tied to an account that they manage and own. And so how do we reset the password? How do we get in? That device is much more bound to that. And in some cases, it could completely lock us out of the device.
Yeah.
And make it very difficult. So a lot of times we see this with either prospects or customers that are getting cleaned up in an onboarding process, we're going through these devices and we're joining them to OnboardIT or to Active Directory. And it's a painstaking process because we're having to get in to these devices that are technically owned by whoever signed in, right? In that sense, kind of like an iPhone. When you bind that to your iCloud, it's sort of a personal device in that sense, even if the company bought it.
Yeah, that's true. And I think having like this type of management level signifies like a little bit higher maturity level for like the company itself too.
Absolutely.
Because then you kind of like realize the value in these profiles, right? And the more that you learn about the different types and what you can do with each, you're like, okay, our business should kind of like
there's no other choice,
go this
right?
way,
Yeah,
because it like literally makes the most sense.
So what we're kind of lending towards is the fact that businesses really should be on Active Directory on OnboardIT, right, Stefan? I mean, when there's certainly maybe some edge cases where you might have a local profile or something like that. What would be an edge case where you shouldn't use Active Directory, you shouldn't use OnboardIT?
Maybe a specific IoT device, a display somewhere showing a computer that isn't used by a user.
Yep.
Maybe in a factory or some
potentially something tied to
billboards,
machinery with very specific drivers, very specific need. But even in those cases, sometimes it'd be better to be OnboardIT or Active Directory joined. So it's sort of in these edge cases, usually it's serving like a single purpose.
Yeah.
And even in the case of like a display, you could still join those to a company directory and use a service account instead of a local. So the cases where you want to use a local profile are very narrow. What about a personal profile? Is there ever a place that a company should use or have their devices with a Microsoft personal account?
I personally don't think so, just because it makes everything a little bit more murky, especially like in the security sense of it. Because if you are binding in a personal account and then you're tying in also like work accounts, meaning like passwords for banks, specific.
You're going to be doing your work in the browser, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, and
and that's synced back to the account that they own.
Exactly, and then a user leaves and you can't manage that account, so they take that data with them.
Yeah,
and it's a little bit scary, right? Because we can't do anything about it, and so really it's up to the discretion of that user to be like, okay, here are the keys back. I'm not taking them with me. Whereas like with these Azure AD types of accounts that we're talking about, we would be able to at least mitigate a little bit of that risk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or maybe even worse, what if you have all your personal data in your personal accounts and you leave the company and all your pictures or bookmarks or banking details are on your personal profile in your Outlook account on your work device.
Okay, so this is almost a pivot that we can make here too. What kind of stuff could a user do in their work profile? What would be acceptable? So there's always this blur between sort of personal use and work use to some extent. But where is that line? What stuff could they store in their work OneDrive or do on their browser or whatever? Do you recommend absolutely nothing, or how do you deal with that segmentation?
Well, it depends. Personally, I wouldn't store any personal data on my work laptop, of course, but you can still access your personal data on your work laptop. For example, by configuring, if your company allows it, configuring a new profile in your browser for your personal stuff, because you also don't want company data to leak into your personal accounts. So you want to keep them separate.
Yeah.
And for example, having two profiles on Edge keeps all the data separate. Some companies don't allow it, of course, because of security reasons. And what I would do is use maybe an in-private window if I would like to access my personal email.
Agreed.
And we all have a phone, and we use our phones for our personal emails. So why would you even go into your personal email on your work computer? But if you do it, use an in-private window.
Yeah, either a second browser profile in private. And then with data, of course, there may be some files that you're creating there, but just know like those files are going to get synced up to your work account. They're going to be backed up there. And if you ever leave the company, getting those files back, it's totally possible, but it depends on how much the company wants to help you, that sort of thing. Generally we're very reasonable with the people that we deal with, but having your personal pictures and files and everything like that can be sort of a problem. So you do want to avoid that, I think.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that Entra profiles and Active Directory profiles solve? So we've talked on some of them, right? The browser,
Yeah, browser.
browser being signed in and synchronizing. OneDrive being used for those known folders.
User
in the work profile.
migrations, I think, if you need to get onto a new machine.
Okay, so let's talk through that because that's probably one of the biggest,
Okay,
right?
okay.
So if I don't have these work profiles and I'm on a personal or a local profile or whatever, how much more painful is it to get that stuff across?
It's a much bigger process. It
Yeah.
takes longer. So what ends up happening is a user or an organization will be like, hey, we want to move this user to a new computer, whether because their computer is broken, it's not working, or they're out of town and whatever, right? The circumstances. If they're on a local profile, you kind of have to go in, extract all the data, go
Sometimes
over.
manually.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no OneDrive, so you're like copying it,
Yeah,
right?
and then upload all that data, and then it's a whole process. With a Azure ID type of account with OneDrive set up, it's literally you sign in, you sync, and then for the most part, most of your data should be
your
there.
browser, all your stuff, your history, your passwords, even
Tabs.
your tabs. Yeah, a lot of that stuff in the browser and Edge
Yeah.
is just you sign into your same work account and then boom, that stuff is coming over. Your
Yeah.
OneDrive files are moving between devices. So how fast could we migrate a user between devices a lot of times?
Oh, geez. I mean, it depends on how many like specific apps.
Barring
they have.
applications, just let's say besides the application installs
I mean, maybe 30 minutes.
or 15 in some cases, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if we get a request to do it between two devices that are just sort of unmanaged, that can take way longer because we're having to do all that stuff manually.
Yeah.
So it makes it, you're basically back up and running with at least your OneDrive and your browser and some of your Windows settings in maybe 5 minutes. I mean, you could go over to another device, right, and just sign in.
Yeah.
And so, it's just so much quicker to migrate between devices.
Yeah, and it streamlines everything. I mean, it mitigates data loss also. Because I mean,
Yep,
at the
that's
end of
something
the day,
people ask us.
human
How
error,
are we,
right?
How are we capturing data in the profile? And that's why we keep talking about OneDrive, right? That's where Microsoft's heading,
Right.
is using the backup for desktop documents and pictures that's built in. And then all those files just get automatically uploaded. So companies come to us all the time. Well, we can't get access to our people's data. Well, it's because you're not using work profiles and you're not using OneDrive and you're not using the policies. Those things cover that almost entirely.
Yeah.
So talking on migration, Stefan, let's talk through migrating between. So we're telling people that are watching, you should be in this type of profile. How can users help prepare to move to a different type of profile?
Yeah, that's actually very simple. Just make sure that your files are on your desktop, in your documents folder, or in your pictures folder. If your files are in there, then we can start a OneDrive sync, everything will upload, and then we can move your computer to a new profile. As soon as you sign in with your work or school account, your profile will download and all your files will reappear.
What about the browser?
I was just going to say,
yeah.
I just want to add one thing to that. Keep in mind downloads.
Downloads folder is not included. That's
Exactly.
correct.
And so if you want to have something in your downloads, make sure that you manually go in there and you do it beforehand so you can keep those. But I just wanted to add
It's
that.
very important. I guess if Microsoft thinks, well, for me too, downloads isn't super important.
It's a temporary folder.
It
It's a
depends. We get some
temporary
tickets
folder.
where people are like,
Well-
everything is really critical in downloads.
I have some files that are critical as well. So,
Sure.
I think that's
yeah.
due to not super good file management practices. But
Oh, yeah. Because you should put it somewhere, if you need to keep it.
in your
'cause-
documents in a folder.
And it also doesn't cover documents in like the C drive, the root, drives. It's only desktop documents and pictures. It's not videos. It's not music either.
correct.
For some of those users, I don't know how many of those are left, but people using those folders extensively. So you're backing up that data. So have your critical data that you want to move over in those three folders.
In those
and
three
kick
folders.
on what? Manage backup, right? In OneDrive. There's a tab specifically for once you're signed in to back those folders up. And you have to turn that on.
Usually it's done by policy, but if you're migrating a computer, it needs to be done manually. And of course, you can check it or provide all the documentation to do a simple check if your data is secure or securely uploaded to OneDrive. And something else, your Edge browser will also keep your bookmarks. When using Chrome, that's an interesting one because Chrome doesn't support work profiles.
Well, they do, right? But you have to have a Google Workspace account. So we can touch on that. Well, let's actually touch on that so that we can properly frame why a lot of people are choosing to use Edge. So with Google, to sign into the browser and synchronize the browser, you have to have a Google Workspace, right?
Yeah.
So with Edge, Microsoft has really, Edge is built on a Chromium framework. And so it's the back end of Edge is actually Chrome. And what you're able to do is sign in with your work account. So your same Microsoft account. So you don't need to have a separate account. And that's something we see a lot because people are using their Google Chrome browser with a personal Gmail, right?
Yeah. And that's
so
something you need to be aware of because it could be a security risk because people are using their Chrome browser for work. They're signed in with their personal Gmail account.
Mm-hmm.
What happens if people save passwords for company applications?
And they are doing that for sure. I mean, we see it all the time. And the user themselves should be aware that by signing in on their work device to their personal Gmail, when we start helping them, a lot of times migrate the browser to Edge and pull all that stuff over, including passwords, might be grabbing some of their personal passwords too. And so what you should really do in that case to prepare Google Chrome, if you're really sensitive about, maybe your bookmarks or your passwords, is go into the settings and remove personal stuff before you pull it over, right? Yep. But in that case that you're signed into your personal account, that's going to make it tricky. So you might have to just start fresh, right? From the Edge browser.
Personally, I would choose to simply sign out of Chrome, delete all the data, and build a new profile in Edge.
But let's say, okay, so maybe you're not signed into Chrome or you're using Edge. What can you do? So if you are a Chrome user, you're not signed in like a personal account, but you have saved passwords, you have got stuff in the browser. Can you move to Edge easily to prepare for this move? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's very simple. It's in settings. You can import all your data from a different browser, for example, Chrome or Firefox.
Yep.
And then it's an Edge. And if your Edge browser is signed in with your work or school account, then your settings will reappear on your new profile.
Yep. And so all that stuff will just be in sync as soon as you pull it across.
Yep.
And likewise, I mean, if you're using Edge already and you're not signed in on your profile, you can prepare for a migration to the proper profile type by just signing into Edge too. Mm-hmm. So you're signing into OneDrive, you're signing into Edge. You're kind of getting your data in your browser. Those are the big things, right? IT usually helps with your applications. If you are moving to a new device, like trying to deal with the application side of things. Is there anything else that we might be missing besides you've got a couple folders that are backed up, right? Dealing with your downloads. You've got your browser stuff.
Yeah, I think the most important thing is to let us know if you have any third-party applications that might store data elsewhere.
Or settings.
Or settings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so a lot of applications, you'll go in and customize preferences, views, different things like that. And those are all sort of integral to the software, right? So moving to a fresh, brand new Windows profile, it's sort of like moving to a new computer, except the applications stay installed, right?
Yeah.
Now, what if somebody has a really complicated profile? There's kind of two ways, right? You start fresh on a brand new profile, or you use a tool, right? Mm-hmm. So, Julio, could you talk to us about that? If there's a really, really customized profile, and the thought of doing this stuff is too much, what's the other option?
Well, I would ask for a little bit more clarification, meaning how is it really complicated, just settings wise, applications wise?
Yeah, so we've seen users, right? They've got tons of, maybe they're an engineer, they've got all this software, they've got so many customizations, and the idea of just simply moving their data in their browser is not enough. Okay, they want their profile to be exactly the same. Can we do that? Can we move from a local profile to an Entra ID profile or an Active Directory profile type? Just basically having the same profile?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Actually, I think we can. We just copy their profile, correct?
Essentially, yeah. So there's tools. ProfWiz, right, is something we've used before.
Yeah.
So that's the most common tool. ProfWiz is going to let us just copy that profile over. And the reason you're not too familiar with that is like we usually recommend for most of our customers starting fresh.
Right.
So that's why it's like, well, we don't do that a lot as a firm because there can be some problems with cloning, or not cloning, but just moving profile types with those tools.
Yeah.
So it's sort of nice for the user, but then we do see some issues crop up with using tools like that. It can cause issues down the road.
I think the biggest problem is that you will copy any existing issues.
Exactly. That too. Yeah.
That's a big problem. And we can still copy a complete profile because if you sign into a new profile, even your icons will stay in the same place.
Exactly.
And some very specific settings will just stay the same. But then you should ask yourself, why would I even want to keep those specific settings? Is it so important that my recycle bin is on that specific place over there?
And it's more than just that, right? I mean, there, like we were talking about, it's program views and settings. It's everything can stay essentially just the same, but we only recommend doing a profile clone in that way if it's absolutely required, because it's opening you up to more issues down the road.
Yeah.
So if you can, preparing your profile, moving to a fresh new profile type is generally a good idea. Let's see. And so you can do that in several different ways, right? A profile you might want to switch from a local or a Microsoft personal profile to a work profile, but you might also want to switch between work profile types, right? In some cases. So we might need to be switching from Active Directory profile on a computer over to OnboardIT. We're trying to get rid of the on-premise equipment, right? And we're trying to move the devices over to OnboardIT, get rid of servers. So we can deal with these profile migrations even between work profile types, right? And I think that's a really important thing to note too. So there is portability between.
The nice thing about Active Directory is that you can prepare policies to start a OneDrive sync. Because Active Directory, it's nice technology, but it's getting old. And the problem with Active Directory is that your computer needs to see your server. So you need to be either in the office or you need a VPN.
Right.
A VPN could be a security issue because you give users too much access to too many applications. And they need to start a VPN. Maybe the VPN doesn't work. Maybe you're at a Starbucks and they don't support a VPN and you cannot sign in to your VPN. So
and we're going to cover all these different things. We can go more into depth about moving from Active Directory to OnboardIT and Intune and all these different things. And that's going to be in future series too. So let's kind of touch on what are the different ways that you could sign into these profiles besides a password on a work profile. And this is supported with personal Microsoft accounts too. But let's touch briefly, like, we're starting to move away from passwords slowly, right? So, Julio, you want to touch on some of the Windows Hello for Business options?
Yeah, one that I think everyone should be on is basically HelloPin. It's basically a more secure version of your password-ish. It's basically almost like a two-factor.
It's considered a phishing-resistant passkey.
Yeah, and I think that's because it's like device tied, right? It's
Exactly.
tied to like that specific device.
Yep.
It can be a short 6 digits, as short as you want, or as long as you want. I just think it's like a much safer way to do it. Obviously, you have the other ones like face and touch and all those, but I think a PIN is the way to go.
Now, one thing that gets really confusing for users is, okay, on my OnboardIT profile or my Active Directory, I've got my password. So I have my work email, I have my work password, right? So when I create a Windows Hello for Business passkey, like my face or a PIN, does that sync to my account? Like if I have a desktop and a laptop, can I sign in with that PIN elsewhere?
No.
Okay. So like you said, it's device bound, right? It's tied to the hardware. So we need people to understand, like, those passkeys, Windows Hello for Business, it's similar to an iPhone. Like when you set a PIN on your phone, if you get a new phone, you have to set up a new PIN. It's for that hardware. It's not for your account.
Right.
And so that's gonna.
I was just gonna say, you still have an Apple ID password, but you can still complete purchases.
Exactly.
You can still use your wallet with your code. Same thing.
So it's definitely device tied, and that's what lets us actually leverage Windows Hello for Business for more security. So we're able to take that credential that's tied to the device and actually harden your Microsoft Online account and all your work resources way better, right? With conditional access and using that as a phishing resistant method.
Right.
So we'll get into that in like another discussion because there's so much to talk about with like conditional access and identity management. But it's important for people to know like there's more than the passwords now too, right? And how that kind of plays in.
Yeah.
And it's also a convenience method, right? It's not just security. Sometimes maybe you got a complex password and on your work device, you just want to enter a PIN and it's still secure. It's just easier to get in than typing your whole password every single time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stefan?
I was gonna say, no, I think Stefan and I were joking the other day. He's like, passwords. No, what did you say? Pins are more secure than passwords, and passwords are gonna be like a dust or something like that. I don't remember.
They're working. Yeah, I mean, it's heading that direction for sure.
Yeah.
It's for the user. It's sometimes difficult to understand why a 6-digit PIN is more secure than a password, but it's actually quite easy.
Right.
You already told us the PIN is tied to the device. So if you go into a phishing website and you type in your password, then of course they have your password. If you type in your PIN, they also need your device, and that's what multi-factor is. They need your PIN and your device.
So it's not necessarily that 6-digit length or complexity is more secure in the sense of like length and complexity, right? Versus a password. A password's technically harder to crack than 6-digit PIN. But because it's physically bound and it's hardware bound, that's more secure. So I think
that's
the idea, part, and that's why they're sort of internationally, everybody's moving away or moving towards rather calling it a passkey, because it's a simple way to explain to people that it's a hardware level authentication. So that PIN is tied to the hardware, and the hardware can actually sign into the online account. And so we're moving more towards like hardware authentication in a lot of cases for proving who I am.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so we actually have one customer, actually we got a couple that are trying to move towards passwordless. Talk to me about that a little bit. How could you possibly have no password?
Yeah, that's actually very simple. When you get your new device, you will get a temporary password that only works once.
It's a temporary access password.
Yeah, a temporary access pass. So the nice thing about a temporary access pass is that if you use your temporary access pass and it tells you that pass has already been used, then you know that your password has been compromised. But anyway, you sign into your device using a temporary access pass, and then you use the tab to configure your PIN. So you don't even have to know your password anymore. You just need to remember the PIN for your device.
Yep.
Which is more secure than using a password.
And it is pretty bleeding edge. So we've talked through some different issues of like really not having a password on the account, but it is fully possible to go straight from a temporary access password given from IT department to registering a PIN and then using your hardware to actually sign into all of your resources online and access all of that securely. And that's a phishing resistant method. So it's much more secure. But for another time, we'll kind of deep dive on conditional access and identity and all that stuff in another episode. But that's kind of a brief intro to some of the ways you can authenticate to these profiles, like on device, right? I guess kind of maybe wrapping up, we've talked a lot about Active Directory and Entra ID as being the way to sign in for corporations in almost every case, no matter the size, right? Whether you're small, large, you should be doing it in a central way. If a company wants to move away from all this on-premise gear, right? Their Active Directory servers and all that kind of stuff, and they're actually in a place to move away from that. Let's say they're in that transition rather. So they're working towards going fully cloud, and they're trying to kind of reduce their dependency on the on-premise side. Can you have an Entra ID joined device and profile? So meaning it's the profile that you're signing into is just with the cloud, right? Office 365 and Entra ID, and still access on-premise resources like a file share or applications. Yep. So instead of having the device bound directly to Active Directory, could you have it managed in a modern way with Intune and still be able to access all that stuff?
Yeah, that's possible. There are in the past, it would be quite difficult working with certificates and creating your certificate server, etc. But it's become easier. There are a couple of built-in policies from Microsoft to allow you to access your file shares, even if your computer is not bound to your Active Directory controller. So you can have your full modern cloud-connected computer that can still access your classic file shares and access files as you're used to.
Yeah, and that's something we've been working on for several customers because they have lightweight dependencies on their on-premise. Maybe it's just a file share. It's something like that, right? Where it's this one use case, but we don't want to have VPNs and all this stuff in order to manage the device. So we're joining their device to Entra ID and managing it with Intune, but they can still have access to those other systems that they've used for a while, like a file share or an application.
Correct.
So we can help get that set up in a project and tie that stuff together. And it's just one step towards higher maturity and starting to move away from systems that are aging out, right? On-premise and Active Directory are sort of on the decline. And it's going to take years before that's fully realized, but some organizations want to start to do away with that stuff. So yeah, wow. I think we covered a lot about profiles, the different kinds of profiles. You know, we went over local profiles, Microsoft personal profiles, Entra ID, and Active Directory, which are the four main kinds, and talked about all sorts of different details about those profile types. So yeah, I think in closing, do you guys have any other things that you can think of that are kind of tied to how we sign into Windows, how we manage Windows, and those different profile types?
No, I mean, I think we pretty much covered it for the most part. Like I said, I think that this really does define the maturity level of an organization. And I think once you get either the size or the team, this like Azure AD joined devices and profiles really is the way to go.
Because, and when you say size, like my personal opinion would be if you have more than 2 to 5 people.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
really just a handful of people, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because local is like, think about it, it's just one. Like only you can manage that device, right? So if your business
has more than 2 people, right?
Exactly.
Basically.
If your business has more than 2 people and they aren't in the office, now we're kind of in this like modern workplace where like we're kind of doing like a hybrid. People are like sometimes working from home, sometimes in the office.
Even for our customers that are like fully work from home or work from the office 5 days a week, they're still partially hybrid. You know, they still have people grab their laptop and work elsewhere on occasion. And so, yeah, I mean, we're seeing all kinds of stuff from fully remote to partially.
Yeah.
But even those organizations that are like, we're in the office 5 days a week still, they're still hybrid.
Yeah.
They are more than they've been ever before.
Yeah, I think just from a management perspective and really from a security perspective, it's like in your best interest to really learn what the different profile types are, what they do, and then which one would be best for your business.
Yep. And Stefan, think of anything else?
And yeah, you mentioned the most important part, security. If you use Entra ID profiles, then you have one place where your audit logs are. So you have one place to look up your sign-ins. If you have a security incident, there's one place to look it up instead of all different places. If you have a local profile, you need to go into the computer and
all those logs are ad hoc, right? Yeah. I mean, if you're there's no logs if it's a Microsoft personal account, really, that we can pull up. And if it's local, it's basically the same. It's really difficult to pull that. And so when we talk about security logging, it's not about like trying to say, what is this employee doing? It's really about security. It's saying that if we have a security incident that was caused on this user's account, how can we, out of, let's say we've got 50 accounts in the organization, how can we quickly figure out what's going on exactly and who it's coming from, right? By name. And so we can go address their account, we can get that closed up, and we can respond quicker. When it's ad hoc, it's kind of chaotic, especially if everything is generic, right? Or, generic local profiles, generically named, turned over 5 different times and renamed. So that's actually something I want to add in closing. Why don't we, I have some smaller businesses usually, but we've had some larger businesses say this. Why don't I just rename the account? That's a question maybe you could answer. I just want to rename it. So it's no longer Stefan I just want to rename it to Brandon, keep all the stuff in the same profile. Why is that a terrible idea?
Yeah, because first, from a security perspective, you have no idea what you're looking for in case of a security incident because the account was renamed.
Five times.
Yeah, maybe 5 times, maybe more.
Maybe more. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen crazy things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, you don't want to move all the history. You can still move all the files in history to a new user, but you want a new user to have their own account, and all the security logs should be in that specific account. And you can still move all the files. You can even move certain mailbox data. You can give users access to other mailboxes instead of moving over the whole mailbox. Because you might be moving stuff that you shouldn't be moving.
And what I've seen, not just on the file side, but on the browser side, we've seen security nightmares with renaming profiles. Because guess what? The profile on Windows is always staying the same. With each new person, they're making profiles in Chrome, saving different passwords. Well, guess what? They're auto-saving a password to somebody who was terminated 3 people ago, and they're saving those credentials in their personal Gmail account. It's a complete and utter mess, right? And unspooling that, we've seen other cloud providers besides OneDrive, right? Where it's just a mess. You know, the profile has one person on the browser, and then they got another person's personal Dropbox. Holy cow. And so by turning that over, by creating a fresh start with each new person that's hired and naming their account, you're stopping that from happening. And yes, it is, you know, it can be a little bit more cumbersome. But if you have an IT department that can help you set that up with each new person or offboarding or whatever, there's no chance that you're going to have that bleed between people, and you're going to keep things clean, both from the logging perspective, the browser, and all the stuff that's signed in. I mean, man, what a nightmare, right?
Yeah. Imagine someone terminated 3 years ago still having access to your recent bank details.
Yeah, because somebody just signed in, and you're still signed in to the Chrome profile, right? And you rename that account multiple times, and all of a sudden that password just came in, and they visit chase.com on their home computer, and they're signed in. Well, they have your credential right there. It's working. Yeah. You know, granted, they do use multi-factor at a lot of banks, thankfully, but still, the point stands. And so, yeah. This, you know, like I said, oftentimes the smaller businesses that have pushed us to just like, oh, well, let's just like rename the profiles. No. And that's going to tie into a whole nother conversation too. There's so many things we can talk about, just generic and renamed accounts versus having everybody with their own named sign in. So we'll have to get into that in another episode. But yeah, I think that probably wraps up most of it. Thanks for chatting about this, but hopefully it provides some value to the viewer of understanding, you know, for work, pretty much the only options that you should be using are Entra ID and Active Directory. Yeah. And only in some very small cases using other things. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us at OnboardIT. You know, if you have further questions about how we can help your organization define these things and set these policies or get to a good spot. But yeah, thanks for watching. Hey guys, thanks for tuning in today and watching our podcast here. Hopefully we provided some value of going over these different types of Windows profiles and why you should use each type. If you guys are finding yourselves having any questions or running into these same issues, feel free to shoot us a message and we'd be more than happy to help map a strategy for your organization. Thanks again for tuning in, and we look forward to having you on the next podcast.